Okay, do we need more? I can't actually. But it doesn't matter about you. That's good. A bit more. Okay. Shoot away, Amanda. I'll just. Yeah? You alright? Yeah. Hello, everyone. Great to see so many of you here. Thanks very much for coming. Very happy to have the opportunity to talk about FC's Falkland Island Seabird monitoring program today. It's kind of the main thing I do in my job with FC. So I'm not going to talk about sort of the results from the last season, because you can look at that in our really nice report that came out in August. So I'll more sort of talk about how we deliver the program and kind of what it can give us. But before I get into the nitty-gritty of that, I want to just touch on why we actually want to monitor seabirds in the first place. And is this working? No, it's not. I got it.
You can swipe on these. It's a touch screen.
Well, I touch it every time.
Yeah.
No, you just swipe it across.
That's Brian, he's an expert at it.
Aha! Technology.
We need to learn this.
Needs to be plugged in.
I need to be plugged in. Yay! Ta-da! Why do we bother? Seabirds are important. Of course they are. Of course I would say that. But they are. They're such an important part of our marine ecosystem and also of our coastal ecosystem. They're a top predator, which means that whatever they do or don't do has a direct impact on the sort of food web marine environment. Also, they poo a lot. So they actually bring quite a bit of nutrients from the sea back to our coastal systems, which is really important. There's a lot of them, and Falkland Islands actually hold lots of populations of global significance. So we have over 70% of the black-red albatross, with 36% of southern rockhoppers, 30% of gentoos, and over 40% of stinkers. And so what happens to these species here in the Falkland Islands really has quite a direct impact on the health of the species globally. And of course, especially, I guess, the penguins and albatrosses are kind of an important part of our national identity, and the tourists like to see them. So the health of these populations really do have sort of quite a direct social and economic value to us as well. So how can monitoring these birds benefit us? Basically, it allows us to track population changes. It allows us to see what the patterns are in the population trends, whether they're increasing or decreasing. It allows us to see when we might have to start to worry if things go downhill. And especially if we have sort of a long-term data set with annual data on what the population is doing, it forms an important basis for understanding what the drivers might be. So we can use this to then test various hypotheses to see what is actually driving the trends and what might be threatening our seabirds, and consequently inform conservation and management on the basis of that. So just kind of going back to the history of the Falkland Islands Seabird Monitoring Program. It was basically launched on the back of a study that was commissioned by Falkland Island Foundation back in, what we used to be called Falkland Island Foundation back in the late 1980s, which was on looking at whether there might be conflicts or competition between seabirds and fisheries in terms of fishery sources. And the study found that there might potentially be competition between fisheries and birds, particularly rockhoppers, gentoos, albatrosses, and Magellanics. And the study suggested or recommended that a long-term monitoring program be implemented to look at the population trends of these species and also at the diet of these species. And so in 1989, the Falkland Islands Foundation, for the very first time, got funding to launch this long-term program. And so now, 35 years later, it's actually a really nice year to be presenting this, 35 years on, We have a really neat long-term data set on various species. The program's kind of evolved somewhat over the years. We've extended on including more species to kind of cover a wider ecological range, so species of different ecological traits, so including birds that nest in burrows, birds that forage more inshore, birds that forage more offshore, and so on and so forth. We now cover 27 sites in total for the whole program. And although the diet component has been dropped, we monitor breeding pairs and breeding success. So breeding success is basically the number of chicks that are raised successfully every year by individual species. So how do we actually monitor the birds? It's not possible to count every single bird every year. Too many of them. So what we do is we use sub-colonies. So basically, it's a bit like this one here. So this is Gentoos on Steeple Jason Island, where we have clearly defined colonies of the various species across the Falkland Islands. So we have multiple of these sub-colonies for each species across the Falkland Islands that we can visit every year and count every year. And it means that the counting accuracy is much higher, and it means also that we can actually get it done within a season for multiple species. So you can see it kind of spreads all around the Falklands, which is really important to make sure that we sort of have a representative picture of what's happening to the various species. These pie charts here kind of show the proportion of the national population that we managed to capture for each species. So you can see for king penguins it's quite easy, quite straightforward to capture the majority of them, because we just have to go to volunteer point, to volunteer green, and count them. For Gentoos as well, we've got a really nice representation as also for southern chine petrels. And you can see for the species down here, a little bit less representation, although I would like to just point out that for rockhoppers and black-red albatross, we count we have sub-colonies on Steeple Jason Island, and Steeple Jason holds about 40% of the national population of both these species. So that is quite important for the representativeness of our data for these particular species. So as I said, we kind of obtain two population metrics every season that we look at. The first one being the number of breeding pairs, so how many birds are actually breeding. So we do that in November, and so actually we don't count individual pairs, we count birds on nests, birds that look like they might be on an egg, so apparently occupied nests, and they're kind of a proxy for breeding pairs. So I'm sure you've all seen this yourselves. Gentoos on nests, rockhoppers, and albatrosses, so this would be kind of the things that we would be counting in November. Then, depending on the species, we go back to all these sites in January and in March, and we count the chicks. And then we can, on the basis of that, we can get a figure for breeding success by simply dividing the number of chicks by the number of breeding pairs that we counted in November. What methods do we use? So there's three methods we tend to use in the field. The most straightforward one is just using a tally counter, and it's a method that can be used without having to worry about the weather, without having to worry about where my next electricity socket might be. It's very reliable. The only issue with it is that some of our sub-colonies are quite big, and so it does help to have an aerial view of the colonies rather than trying to count every single bird manually from sort of down, although rover does help sometimes. So yeah, for the bigger sub-colonies, we tend to drone them, or if it's too windy, we use a pole with a GoPro attached to it, although sometimes it gets so windy that the pole breaks. Yeah, that was a recent experience. It was fun. Yeah, so these are kind of the three methods we use, and they all kind of, I guess, have their advantages and disadvantages in terms of cost and time it takes in the field, and then after the field. the weather conditions we can do them in. It's quite nice for the drone images that they kind of provide a permanent record of what colonies look like. So going forward, might be quite interesting to kind of have this sort of time series of how they actually change in time as well. Whilst we're in the colonies, we take the opportunity as well to look at any kind of environmental things that might be impacting the colonies locally. So things like marine debris or entanglements, any kind of evidence of disease, particularly now with bird flu, evidence of predation, so anything that might be impacting the colony on a short-term or a long-term basis, because that's quite important to know when we look at, especially, sort of on a site-by-site case of what might be happening to colonies. It can help us understand if perhaps there's suddenly a big drop or something compared to other sites. There are quite a few challenges involved in sampling and doing fieldworking in remote sites. Just accessing the sites has its challenges. Quite a lot is done has to be covered by off-road. So bogging is kind of just the norm every now and again. Well, I'd like to say that I haven't yet had to be rescued in a bog, but I think Derek will vividly always remember the time when I arrived with just half a rover at volunteer and kind of had to weld the rover and my spirits back together very recently. So
You enjoyed rescuing.
Had lots of hugs from a volunteer. But yeah, and also just the wind and the cold obviously kind of always poses challenges, just trying to get to places like Steeple-Chasen where we have to get a boat and we kind of have to scramble off a dinghy to get on shore, get into New Ireland. Dan can probably tell us best about how easy or not easy that is. So yeah, it's all fun. Ooh, something fell. And then the birds bring their own challenges. So I would lift my shirt and drop my trousers to show you my flea bites, but Garnell is filming, so it's probably inappropriate.
You could share the
But
picture with your mom.
that's not a flea bite, that's just a penguin kiss. But yeah, we did the Magellanic counts on Sunday, and oh my god, the fleas. I mainly used to in the past work with albatrosses, and they don't have fleas, they just smell nice. But yeah, Magellanics have fleas, a lot of them. We come across a lot of really cute albatross chicks, but they vomit a lot. And this is why I didn't use a picture, because I don't have a picture of a vomiting albatross. They vomit. Every now and again you have a giant albatross fly into you when you're just about finished counting. And then you just feel this giant thing fly into you and you're like, no, I've lost my count, I've got to start again. And we've also had notebooks stolen by these guys. We found it again with a drone. True story. Unfortunately, we also now have this added challenge of bird flu, of course, which, is firstly really hard just to see when you're out there. It is really quite sad when the population is badly affected. But also just like wearing, the additional PPE and making sure we do best practice for biosecurity, just adds obviously added challenges. Just finding the PPE in town is actually a massive challenge. There seems to always be a shortage. But yeah, so there's that as well now. So once all the fieldwork fun is over, I get to do this fun. With Glenn, who helps me a lot with doing the drone counts. So yeah, so once we finished in the field, we look at all the drone images that we captured, and we start counting from them. And it's quite time consuming because it's not an automated process, so we kind of manually stitch the photos in the sense that, like, I draw lines of where we count on the one image and then what we count on the next image. And then we have a program where we can click on every single bird and it gives you a little number next to it. But yeah, it's a good way to develop clicky itis. So that's what we do after all the field work. And then once that is finished, we have all the data, it goes into our database, and we produce these lovely trends for all the different species. So for like the breeding pairs and for breeding success. And it then goes into the annual report, which I'm sure you're looking forward to already next year. So just to summarize, the kind of logistics of the thing is that it takes about 7 weeks of field work, just actually being in the field every year. And yeah, there's a lot of kilometers covered in boats, by 4x4, by plane. And we physically count about 82,000 seabirds every year. Actually, it's double that because we always count them twice, just to be sure, by 2 people, so it's quadruple that. It takes about 6 months of my time, and then there's a lot of time from volunteers that is dedicated to us. And actually, on this note, I'd like to thank, firstly, yes, all the volunteers that help us with it, but actually a huge amount of people that are involved in making the FISM a success every year. FIG funds the program. There's a lot of landowners that grant us access to their sites, which means we can continue year on year to count our colonies. There's a lot of parties that just provide massive logistical support and deal with all the sort of changes from plan A to plan B to plan C that always happens because of weather and other things, rovers breaking down. Sorry, me breaking it. And there's people, other scientists and landowners that also collect data and provide us with their data that we can add to the program to make our trends more robust. So yeah, a huge amount of people. Some of you are in here. Yeah, great thanks to everyone. I'm not finished. Sorry, not that quick. So I want to just talk quickly about like using the FISM, because obviously, okay, now we have all these trends. What do we do with it? I mentioned at the beginning that obviously the monitoring allows us to, okay, we can track the population changes. We can use it as a foundation to explore drivers and threats. We can use it to inform conservation and management and so on, but it also helps us to understand when we might have to start worrying. But when do we actually start worrying, and when do we start to act? At what point do we make that decision? And so just as an example, I'd like to show, so this is the Gen2 breeding population index from the last decade. And it shows quite a sharp decline. But actually, if you look at it for the last 35 years, it's been oscillating quite a bit. So it doesn't look quite as terrible. But what happens if that trend decided to carry on declining? At what point would we say, okay, now it's actually a problem? Now it's gone beyond, what we would expect it to do naturally.
Sorry, is 0 the long-term average?
Yes, it is. Sorry. Yeah, I should explain this. Yeah, so 0 is kind of the average, so it's just a bit below the long-term average again. So yeah, at what point do we decide, okay, this is now a problem? So many of you might have heard of IUCN Red Lists. So it's basically a tool that categorizes species globally into categories of being least concern in terms of conservation concern to extinct, where it's kind of too late to worry about them. And it's done on the basis of various criteria, so things like population size, rate of decline, the extent to which they might be distributed across the planet. And it's kind of a way for catalyzing action for biodiversity, for particular species. Like an objective way for deciding this is now this has now become something that we need to worry about. And so the red list is, the IUCN red list is something that's done on for like the global conservation status of a species. But what a lot of nationalities, a lot of countries do, like for example the UK and Iceland and many more, is they have a national red list. So they basically just apply the IUCN red list criteria to on their own national scale. And again, it just helps them develop something like an objective tool to decide on a threshold of when actions or policy changes might be implemented. And we don't have something like this in the Falklands at the moment. We don't have a Falkland Islands red list. And we would actually really like to see if we could bring about something like this here in the Falklands as kind of a natural progression of the I'm still not done. Two more things, very quickly. So this is kind of related to the FISM. It's two other kind of monitoring that we have been doing, that we are doing. One of them being island-wide censuses. So this is when we do count every single bird, every single breeding bird of a particular species on the island. And we've done this in the past for various species, penguin species, albatrosses, giant petrels. And the benefit of that is that you do end up with kind of an actual figure of how many breeding pairs you have of a particular species. But some of the limitations are that it's very costly and extremely time consuming to do that, to the point where it's not something you can do every year. And it's also a bit more difficult to compare in terms of what the trend might be doing, because there's so many birds, you end up with much bigger confidence intervals, and so you have 2 points, and it's much harder to see whether birds have actually gone up and down because you've got these massive confidence intervals. The other thing is as well that you might actually miss the actual trend depending on when you do your census. Thank you. So, for example, here the giant petrel was monitored, I think that's 2004, 2005, and then it was monitored again in 2015. 2015 was a year when a lot of species were struggling. It coincided with an El Nino, and a lot of breeding pairs from different species plummeted. And so, if we'd done a census of the species the year before, we would have had a very different picture of it. So yeah, and the other thing as well is that because you don't do an island-wide census every year, you end up with much fewer data points than for an annual program, as the FISM. And so it's much harder to actually use it to identify drivers of what is impacting the trends, what is driving the trends. But what we do every year is we have an albatross demography study colony. And basically what that is we have a small site of about 300 nests where we tag every individual bird that breeds there and their chicks every year. So we know who they are, we know how old they are if they've been bred as chicks, and it helps us understand what the actual age structure is of the population, what the demography is of the population. Are they getting older? Are they getting younger? We can look at things like at what age the birds start to breed. We can look at things like adult survival rate. And all these things are quite important for understanding bigger impacts on a colony from things like bird flu, for example. And this year we, for the first time, we started putting color rings on, because they used to just have the little metal rings, which are quite hard to read. The color rings are also used on New Island, and they're quite fun because they kind of spell things. So this one is a green ring, so it actually spells goat, which I thought was really fun. Yeah, they also have, like, it's basically a number and then 2 letters, so there's a lot of initials, and all the AKs went out first, But yeah, the joy didn't last very long because there was only 10 of them. So.
Amanda, is that just the bird with the sort of orange and yellow stuff? Is that the vomit you referred to?
No, sorry, I should explain. So this is spray paint.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it's spray paint. So yeah, so thanks for pointing that out. It's not vomit. So we go around reading their rings, and to make sure we don't have to hassle them twice, once the ring is read, we give them a little dot. So then when we go back the day later or 2 days later, we can just harass the birds that we haven't read yet. But again, it'll be much easier once they have just the colour ring on to read them. But of course, I'll get spray paint. Yeah, thanks. Okay, now I'm finished.
Thank you so much, Amanda. As you see on her, lots of you here already deal with that she's all bruised from trying to do all that. Yes, just I pretend that's what it was. And it's great having Zoe here, who's obviously been organising all this happening across the islands, which has been
project I haven't.
no, but that's all been really, it's been really,
Yeah.
that's been a great help to you guys in knowing how to manage all this. So that's excellent. But were there any particular questions people had for Amanda? Yes.
It's actually on numbers, particularly tourist site numbers. Last season, I asked the question of how many breeding Magellanics there were at Gypsy Cove, and I was given a statistic which I can't remember the figure per square kilometre. Meant nothing to me, meant nothing to most people, and you've got the raw data, so it must be possible to say, well, we estimate there are X amount of breeding birds at Gypsy Cove, or there's X amount of breeding king penguins at Volunteer Point, rather than this statistic of a percentage per square kilometre.
So for the Magellanics, it is actually more difficult because they're burrowing birds, so we would never count every single bird, because for burrowing birds, it is really, really hard to do that. So what we would do is basically count from a number of burrows and then try and model or estimate the population size. But we haven't done that for Magellanics, so we are just looking at burrow occupancy, and that is what we're using as our proxy for how well the population is doing. It's something that we can look into, perhaps.
But it would be useful even if you have a statistic of there's X amount of occupied burrows.
That is probably what
the statistic of so many birds per square kilometre is
42% this year.
Sorry?
42% this year.
Yeah.
Up from 28% last year, so that's not
Yeah.
bad.
But it's not a meaningful, if you can say, well, we estimate there are 250, for instance, occupied burrows, and last year there were 500 or whatever. At least you've got something you can. Most people can
Sure.
More relatable.
relatable rather than a percentage per square kilometre.
Yeah.
I think
Because
it's
how
really
many square kilometres actually is Gypsy Cove? Or proportion of the square kilometre of Gypsy Cove instance.
I think it'd be really useful for government to have an actual figure, because over the last few years you see the tourism down there, and for me it's a very negative impact on them, and they're being constantly disturbed. Last week, for example, particularly bad, and Brian as well was very sort of conscious of it as well. So to be able to have some baseline data of 100 years, 10 years ago there were 100 or 50% occupancy, and now there's only 5%, or if it's gone up, just to be able to give government something to be able to, figures to be able to better manage their sites at tourism.
So yeah, we do have the occupancy rate. That is what we do have, as in percentage occupancy. But no, we do not have an actual value of this is how many burrows there are and this is how many there are occupied. But yeah, perhaps something we can do in the future.
Because you can
Capacity.
look on burrowing, then understanding burrowing is numbers.
we So we've been doing over the last 2 years. We've been asked by government to look at the number of occupied boroughs. Oh yeah, there's on of city shearwaters on and whiting petrels on the Four Tussock Island side here. So it's for sure top and bottom island. And this is where we did then deliver an actual estimate of breeding pair numbers. But it's a very different approach, and it's a lot more involved than what we do or what we currently have capacity for at Gypsy Cove. But yeah.
I mean, we know that the predation by sea lions last year was really quite high towards the end of the season. And it's just, you know, there were so many people go there, and it would be nice to be able to sort of just give an estimate of, you know, and so you can, you know, we can see, you know, we know that there were certain days last year where they were taking 4 to 5 penguins a day.
Okay.
So, you know, at least to be able to relate to that in years to come.
Sure.
Get on with that, Amanda. What
Yeah.
are you doing?
Right, see ya.
I'll go do that.
But getting some feedback on what tourists actually ask would be really interesting in terms of presenting some useful, some.
Not the sort of thing like, why don't they fill these holes with concrete?
Yeah.
Is that a
Big
penguin?
one.
Are you talking about the burrows?
So we
Yeah,
could
that's
have,
all one. Paul, I can give you my whole book of stupid questions I
well,
didn't
no,
ask at
we
Gypsy
can
Cove,
rule out the
like-
wacky ones. I think Megan was asked, how often do we feed the penguins? And,
Where do
some-
they eat?
Daily.
Yes. But yeah.
Yeah.
Hello, thank you for sharing your wonderful experiences and also highlighting the need for the IUCN local criticalness.
Oh yeah.
So my question is that something that FC is going to pursue and lobby with our environmental and our MLAs? Is that something that's going to be pushed forward, that we are going to have a critical list for our local species?
It's something that we want to look into for sure. Yeah.
Is there a time frame on that, or is there
Not at this point, no. It's kind of been something we've been talking about for a while, and I guess just haven't really gotten around to it, which is a shame. But it's definitely something that we want to prioritise going forward. So perhaps start making plans for it over the next season, and then see how it could be delivered and who could be involved in terms of having, you know, perhaps a working group involved in it, like they do in the UK, but there's actually quite a few parties collaborating on it.
Would it be, do you think it might be a sort of a priority, considering that we have salmon farming and marine managed areas up for discussion now, in the coming, like, it's all sort of happening very soon, we don't have these questions. Well, what I'm saying is the discussion, the discussion is on the floor now, and you know, the marine managed plan, the scoping exercise has already started, and those papers are coming forward. So I was just wondering, that might be something that should be feeding into those decision making and those policies.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it will inform a lot of different aspects, including what you referred to. So yeah, I think it's certainly something that we can try and take forward.
Just as a point of information, it has been done at a regional scale, so the Patagonian Sea Forum has involved scientists, well ourselves, scientists from Argentina and Chile, and looked at a regional scale across the Patagonian Sea. So there is the IUCN criteria have been done for that. There is also a red list for the plants in the Falkland Islands, which was done as part of Rebecca's project. So it's not something, you know, it's something that has been initiated here before, so it's not a completely novel approach that we have to persuade people about. I think the kind of model is there to be used.
But if you were going to follow that model, you would have to follow the same model to actually have some credibility, you know, the same IUCN criteria. And it's, I mean, I'm not saying it's rigid, it's quite involved with shark species around the Falklands, the same thing. IUCN work this, they've done every 10 years. You could do it on a local basis, but of course it's local work.
It
A
is
lot
a
more
lot.
experts, so,
Absolutely, it
you
is.
know, it's not like you go and say, oh, just go and do the ticket and there you go. No,
No,
actually,
absolutely.
it's not
Yeah.
quite so straightforward.
It's a peer reviewed process.
Yes, absolutely.
Just getting the ball rolling.
But you can
And of course,
certainly compare.
that might cause extra tension for fisheries though, because obviously, seabed mortality in fisheries is obviously a thing, and if you start qualifying things with their local IUCN designation, that could also have an impact.
It could, but remember, the IUCN criteria are not legally binding, like they are
No, they're not.
advisory.
Yeah.
So if you say, look, the black-eyed albatross are near threatened, I think, is that what they are, or are they?
No, they're least considered globally, and they,
So actually, but it doesn't mean you can therefore just do whatever you want because the black-eyed albatross are least concerned. But if they become near threatened, you might build in some extra protection in whatever other processes there are. You've got to that advice.
so we see that, for like white-chinned penguins, for example, internationally they're listed as vulnerable, but locally, like on New Island, we have a real risk of actually losing them, like of local extinction at the moment on New Island. Obviously they are still very much present here, and the Tassie Islands just outstanding, but it is
And
stuff
why
like
would
that
that
as
be?
well. Pardon?
Why would that be
Where they're declining?
on New Island? Is that because of all these predators?
It's a possible reason, yeah,
Yeah.
and just habitat degradation is really another reason. But yeah, it's just to point out that it then does kind of allow us to highlight species that might need extra attention here locally.
Sorry, yes, I think Lewis, you had your hand up before.
Sorry.
It was so long ago you might have forgotten.
Yeah, I went almost off to sleep. Fantastic presentation, Amanda, thank you. I say that against having been a trustee of the Falklands Foundation, having raised the funds to begin that work in the late 80s. I think it's fantastic that there is now some credible information that can hopefully steer conservation management going forward. The only question I have is in regard to the giant petrels.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding would be that there are probably several large colonies around the Falklands where access is not allowed. So how confident can you be on those figures? And I say that against my visible citing of around Weddell that numbers are much higher than they were 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Much higher.
I mean, I think they are increasing. They are increasing on our trend as well.
Sorry. Giant petrels.
Giant.
Yeah. So we cover about 8% of the estimated national population, and the trend is increasing as well for breeding pairs, like our trend. So it probably coincides with what you're seeing.
The census figures are taken from aerial photography, so the individual you might or might not be referring to, we don't actually have to access these items for the full census.
So the point of getting at that is you've got a real degree of confidence on those giant petrel numbers.
Pardon?
On giant petrel numbers,
Yeah.
you've got a good degree of confidence on those numbers.
Well, you saw the confidence intervals, they are quite big for giant petrels. Where are they?
Mainly given that there's access to some of the largest breeding colonies or not.
But yeah,
Okay.
but it is going up. The
Yeah,
trend,
no,
so
certainly,
so-
it's certainly not.
And and to what extent is the increase in the giant petrel population a potential impact on the Gen 2 populations. for
Yeah.
example.
So these are the sort of things that the FISM can't answer directly, like it's just we produce the trend, but it's that kind of data that is useful to have as a like a building stone for understanding what might be driving what. Yeah.
As a lot of predation on the Gen 2 colonies by stinkers, I'm going to say, being evidenced or being witnessed by you?
Not personally, to be honest. I mean, you do see some, but not to the extent where I would be massively concerned at this point. But you know, often landowners, you know, they spend sometimes more time at these colonies than I can, and perhaps they have more information.
I think something worth noting with giant petrels is some areas that they haven't colonised in the past years, and then now a lot have actually moved on from them areas.
Sorry, pardon, what was the question?
No, it's not a question, it's just an observation
It's an
that I've
observation.
made over the years, that you see giant petrels will be nesting in some areas, and then a few years down the line you'll see none. So they've obviously moved to other colonies which would grow.
Yeah, that does happen, that they abandon a site and they move around. And it is actually another challenge of kind of, you know, doing long-term monitoring of certain species. They, like shacks, for example, they can just suddenly abandon a certain area for a few years and then come back, which makes it quite tricky to.
Also with predation, they're more of a scavenger than a predator, so they would, if there's dead penguins laying there, they'll come and get them, but if the colony's healthy, it's not that often they'll actually see predation by them.
Yeah. I've seen it on, you know, in shack colonies and so on, but again, not to the extent where I would be.
But they do more young lambs, though, don't they?
Yes,
Apparently.
yes.
So I hear, I have not seen
Same.
it myself because I don't work with lambs. But
The same way as the modern Gen 2s, the wings are outstretched like this, like the person surrendering 3 or 4 or 5 or just congregate and increasing. In a way, Ben used the word scavenger, but they're quite a predator these days.
Yeah.
At all
There used to be something you'd see around the killing shed in our days.
Yeah.
A couple of them.
Or the seawall.
Yes, around the seawall.
Well, I think the ready food is not out there anymore. That used to be all around the settlements with these birds, like the butchery and Stanley and all that. You know, you had thousands of them flying up and down the harbour every day, going up to the butchery for their feast from a kill.
Have you ever been to the outfall there?
Yeah, but I mean, you know, there's a lot of readily available stuff that was there that's not now.
Yeah, but then on the other hand, there's discards out in the ocean which there wouldn't have been before. So, you know, obviously that's the big thing. Sorry.
No, it'll
A pantry, there's no pantry out for them.
I'm aware that people might be wanting to, we've got food and drink, and so I think, sorry, you just had a question at the back.
Yeah, I may have missed it, but I was wondering if in the Falkland we are hosting species which are under concern on the red list, or?
So we have the Seabirds. There's the rockhopper and the white-chin petrels that are listed as vulnerable.
Okay.
Everyone else is okay.
Yeah, and the trends of the population trends in the last year, do you know if they are increasing or decreasing?
So I can show you. So these are the rockhoppers. Hang on.
Yeah.
There was one trend that I had for steeple and the one for the local. So they're kind of going up and down. But what's a bit concerning is that there's been sort of a really steady decline in breeding success. And obviously we need the chicks to eventually feed back into breeding population. So that's for rockhoppers. And then what was the other one? Oh, I don't have white chins here, but yeah, I mean, as I said, on New Island, for example, they've declined quite a bit. yet, and we're just getting kind of baseline data of the species now for the islands out here. But not much is known about them now.
But I should imagine white ships is very difficult to estimate population.
Yeah, because again, they're boring bird, so you're not going to go out and count every single bird. You kind of have to just do it by sort of survey plots and then an estimate across all sides.
What's the estimate for Kidney? How many breeding white ships there?
Come on, Amanda.
Yeah, I know. I'm so
Where-
terrible at remembering numbers. I don't even know how old I am. 25. No, I think it was in a range of like 300, and then with confidence intervals going up to several hundred, like up to 1,000, probably, yeah. But yeah, there's big confidence intervals because it is so hard to get them. But yeah, we just did Bottom Island, and it looks really quite promising for options. We haven't done the statistics yet. But looking nice.
Great. Was there anything else burning? Otherwise, we'll say thank you very much to Amanda. Thanks for being here. Thank you very much for all the good questions. Really good. Really great to have you all engaging on everything. Thank you so much. Please help yourself to food and drink if you have time. And it's just been great to have you all here. Thank you for all the help. Thank you for the chair and treasurer and team treasurer. Really great to see everyone. Hooray.